Hello, Nick.
Hello, Alicia.
Nick Wilsdon, consultant and founder at Talk. SEO with 22 years of experience who can deploy high-performance programs across large organizations and global brands. Based in the UK, area of expertise, enterprise SEO, Edge SEO. Worked with such agencies as Rina Media, Havas, Dentsu. And with such brands as Vodafone, eBay, Lavabeam. Search Awards judge, speaker at conferences and contributor to specialised media.
You mentioned Edge SEO, and many people, not that we are going to go into the basics of it, but very briefly, why is it a thing? So why is it important?
Yeah, it's become increasingly important now as the CDN layer has been developing. So we've always used CDNs for distributing content. So when you CDNs like Cloudflare or Akamai or Fastly, they have a distributed series of servers around the world. And when I say access your website in Mumbai, and your servers are based in California, for example, then I don't have to go all the way to California for that request. So I access a kind of semi-local copy or a cached copy in Mumbai. So we've kind of relied on these CDN networks to distribute content globally, and that's given websites much better responsiveness, performance, and ability to kind of deal with traffic globally. Now, those CDN networks have been developing, and they've gone from fairly simple sort of servers serving lightweight content, lightweight pages, to having increased processor and CPU capabilities. And that means that they can start to do more than just serve content. They can start to run programming on that layer, on those servers. So they can start to manipulate the request. And we've now added, in terms of computed edge, we've now added the ability to have kind of storage in these areas. So whether we have set storage, static storage, or whether we have dynamic sort of database almost storage with KV Store, we have the ability to store information and do very much more complex logical processes on the edge. And that's really opened up a huge amount of possibility really for us on web. We don't have to rely anymore on computation on the origin servers. We can start to do computation on the edge, and you can imagine that's a huge opportunity for every part of digital.
It sounds very exciting, but can you give some real-world example, maybe without mentioning any names or brands, but something like you've done something and it worked this way, and in terms of ROI, return on investment, it was like that, if possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and get us down to ROI, but I can tell you that a very simple use case for Edge might be redirections. Because normally with the redirection, we take the user in, they come through Akamai and they come to the origin server. And when they get to the origin server, we usually then redirect them to where they're meant to be going. And that means they can sometimes get bounced back out through the CDN and back into the origin server. So if you think about it in that way, it's very inefficient as a journey. It's not a good way of transporting the user. So if you have those redirects on the edge and you redirect the minute the user touches the Akamai network or the Cloudflare network, the minute they interact with that network, they go immediately to the destination they're meant to go to. You can see that this is a much more efficient way of dealing with those user requests. And some of the advantages we've had on that in real world examples is I've reduced some journeys from 900 milliseconds on a response to 250 milliseconds. So you can see there's a dramatic increase in web performance by doing that. So, this is great. It's good for the user. It's really good for Google, because Google doesn't want to crawl unnecessary journeys that when it's only getting redirected. And, we can start to do a much better use of our redirects, and we can start to manage redirects. And another use for this might be kind of one-to-one redirects, where normally when you work with a company, they're very resistant to put a lot of one-to-one redirects on the server. They sort of their IT department will complain. They'll say, how are we going to manage these? This is going to cause a lot of performance impact. So when you're doing this on the edge, you can literally have millions of one-to-one redirects without any impact on performance. So from a kind of an SEO point of view, where we want generally one-to-one redirects, we don't want kind of rules that send all of those redirects to the homepage or all of the redirects to one of the category pages. We want to manage lots and lots of very specific one-to-ones, because we want to maintain those journeys really for the user. We want to send them to something that's got the same intent, the same product. We want to manage this process much more in much more detail for Google. So you know, if we get to kind of ROI on that, I mean, it's quite difficult to separate that from all the other SEO activity we would do, but you know, internal and inbound URLs are incredibly important for SEO. So yeah.
What are the costs involved? Both not only money, but also you need time. You need maybe some other resources. So what do you need to start doing that and offering it and making it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it can get quite complex. I mean, in the beginning, it's fairly simple. I would recommend that people look at Cloudflare because Cloudflare is accessible. A lot of people are using Cloudflare as their CDN, so it's very easy to get into that area as a developer or as an SEO, technical SEO, really, who wants to explore how to do this in Cloudflare. So that's you know, and they're very, very supportive in terms of Edge and Edge Compute and giving free access to some of this capability to users. So Cloudflare is a fantastic place to start learning this. It's much harder to get into Akamai, which is more enterprise. They don't have as many or any options for developers or people who just want to learn it. It's kind of big enterprise platform, so it's quite hard to get access to that. But you can certainly learn a lot of this on Cloudflare. In terms of costs, I mean, there are costs associated with this, and this is obviously why the CDNs are doing this in the first place. This is a way of them upselling and selling computation in the same way, you know, computation on demand, essentially, which is what a lot of they've realized there's a huge amount of money to be made in offering this kind of computation. So those costs kind of vary a lot between, you know, Cloudflare, Akamai, Fastly, but they're not as high as you might think. So that's good. I mean, this is, if you're taking something like, you know, maybe you're doing something around A/B testing, for example, and you wanted to A/B test your entire website. Not a sort of traditional A/B test where we would test one version simultaneously with another, but an SEO kind of A/B test where we test before and after. So for SEO, when we're doing this kind of testing, so we wanted to replace a menu structure or something like this, we'd want to insert that menu into our new site very easily, and we could do this via Edge. And then we'd want to make sure that all the traffic, you know, bots and user traffic, was all getting served the same response, the same page, and the same new menu. And we would do this at a fraction of the cost that it would be to do this through Optimizely or one of the other platforms that traditionally you'd use for A/B testing. So it is a very, very cost efficient way of doing large scale changes on sites. So yeah, not as expensive as you would think, but and you're kind of asking what the other costs. I mean, learning to develop this.
Yes,
I
yeah,
think it's
yes.
something.
I mean, do
Yeah,
you need some developer like JavaScript, or is my JavaScript level enough for
it's
that, like, or someone
yeah.
else's?
You can start very, very basic level, to be honest, Alessia. So JavaScript's really what's required. Some platforms are kind of getting into WebAssembly, so you go from Java runtime, which can just run quite basic JavaScript. You can get into sort of WebAssembly and Rust and start to kind of build much faster scripts that are compiled that will work better at scale. For larger sites, but yeah, certainly getting into it, it's JavaScript, and there are slight differences between the Edge platforms. There's differences in the way that you code for Cloudflare versus Fastly versus Akamai. They're all slightly different, but generally it's JavaScript.
Is it hard for big enterprises to understand the idea of Edge SEO and make it adopted and proceed with that, like the integration and the whole process of starting it over? Is it hard?
Yeah, I think they find it. I mean, they find it an opportunity, to be honest, at a large enterprise. So they're very excited about this because there's a large challenge with big enterprise in terms of getting things done. I think a lot of SEOs look at large enterprise sites and they can't quite work out why seemingly, you know, basic things haven't been done. And you know, I've done this as well in the past. You look at it, go, why? Gosh, surely they must have known that. They must have seen this. I've run an audit with Screaming Frog and I found these things that are wrong. And you know, surely they must be able to fix this. And there's a kind of problem with large enterprise sites where it's very difficult to push these kind of changes through. And whether that's just the CMS concerned, whether it's the developer teams that are dealing with that CMS, whether it's even that CMS management is even in this country. I mean, it can be based in offshore teams. It can be based, you know, it's sometimes much harder to get things done at enterprise than I think people would realize. So the opportunity you have with Edge is huge because we can come in, liaise directly with the Edge team, do something like redirects or do changes very quickly with a single point, a single team, and then roll these out in a period of months instead of, you can get something done in 1 month or 2 months, versus things that might take 8 or 12 months normally through the dev team. So it's significantly faster, and I think big enterprise kind of likes that velocity. They like the speed at which you can execute these tests and these pilots. So generally they're very, very positive really about Edge. And I think even if you don't use Edge to permanently fix something, even if you use Edge to maybe prove the concept, so you for example, you take Edge and you completely optimize a web page for page performance, and you dramatically improve it, Google will still retrieve that page as the optimized page, which is perfect. And you may then choose to keep that layer there, or you may say, well, now we proved it, we're now going to get this done with the developer sprints. So now we're going to feed this back into our development cycles to get it done. But that's still proving that in a matter of months is still pretty dramatic, and it's pretty fast moving really for large enterprise. So they tend to be pretty happy about this kind of work, to be honest.
How do you find these enterprises, or how do they find you? So it's not like Upwork case, yeah, when you go and find someone there, but that involves maybe lots of negotiation and talking and looking at each other. And how do you do that? How do you start like that?
It's I mean, it really is largely word of mouth and reputation that get you these jobs. That's what I've always found. I've worked in enterprise for many years now. I mean, obviously I've been in SEO for 22 years, but I've worked in Vodafone for 8 years. And you work with very senior people, and those senior people move to other companies, and they become senior people at other companies. And your reputation kind of precedes you really in terms of the work that you do. And I'd say that all my work pretty much comes through networks and people who either I've worked with or know somebody who I've worked with. That's generally how. I think you're right. You would struggle to get this kind of work with Upwork or these kind of sites, because you wouldn't have the probably the reputation or the credibility to be able to walk into a large enterprise and get that work, even if you actually in reality had the skill. And I'm not saying that people on Upwork don't have the skill. They probably they do. But yeah, it's difficult to get those kind of jobs. And you're right. It's a lot of negotiation. I think I've recently got a client, and we negotiated with them for 4.5 months to get the project started. So that's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work. You're securing a master services agreement that takes a very long time. You have to have the right insurances in place. I think we have $5 million in cyber insurance covering us. So you have to have all these various things in place to be able to get this work. And you have to be able to get through procurement, you have to get through legal, you have to understand how to secure these kind of jobs. And it's definitely not easy for a sort of single person or a single freelancer to be able to secure them. And then once you do secure them, then you're probably going to deal with, net 60 or net 90 before you get paid at the. So yeah, it's difficult working with enterprise. It's definitely not easy.
So before you start working with someone like that, before you got contract, you need to have how much for your investment, like $100,000, or how much before you get first client to make sure you are covered?
Yeah, I would say you need to be thinking about that kind of area. Yes, definitely. I mean, you can find clients that are easier than other clients, and you may. I love it when we find a client who is net 30. It's fantastic. It's it makes such a big difference. It's quite difficult sometimes, I think, for people to understand that we celebrate a big client win, but the win is always kind of offset slightly by the fact that we now have to cover everyone's payments that are based on 30 days, maybe for up to 90 days. So every win comes with a sort of slight tinge of how are we going to, we've got to bridge all these loans, cover these costs to get this in. So it does become quite a complex thing to navigate, but it's certainly difficult if you didn't have some funding built up. So whether you do that through investment, or whether you do it through work on other projects, but you can kind of move up to these larger enterprise projects in that way. I've never taken investment really for myself, but I've always done it through self-investing with my own work.
How fierce is the competition inside this Edge SEO enterprise SEO. So are there really many people who are hunting after one client, or is it more diverse and more complex?
No, I'd say it's a very new area right now. So I wouldn't say there's a lot of people working in this area. So it's still fairly new. If you imagine that Cloudflare and Akamai and the other CDNs have kind of developed this amazing platform, they've developed amazing kind of play area for us all to create this in. And it's almost the same as someone's just invented Apache. They've created it. They've got so what's everyone going to do about it now? How are they going to work in it? And that's there aren't enough people to create the scripts, the edge workers to architect the solutions. They don't exist in this space, so it's still very it's not very contested. I think that will change over the next few years, but certainly it's a weird blend of skills to get good at edge, and I think that's why I quite like it, because you're developing scripts, but you're keeping one eye on SEO. That's usually why you've done it. You're keeping an eye on performance, because if you're going to start changing things with edge scripts and you add 90 milliseconds or 120 milliseconds to the request, you may not have had an upside to the work you're doing. So you need to be able to understand performance. You need to be able to measure performance in everything you're doing. You need to have understanding of networking, and you're checking routes on the command line. You've got a sort of idea of kind of an idea of CDN architecture, at least at a sort of basic level. So all of these things kind of come together in one place to be able to do edge work, and that's made it a very interesting area, because often CDN people generally would be more working on security and configuration of the CDNs. They wouldn't necessarily be thinking about coding, and even the ones who would be thinking about coding wouldn't be thinking about the marketing opportunities of doing that coding. So it's a very interesting area to be in, but it does require a kind of combination of skills, and I think that's probably why there aren't many people in that area right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. How much time does it take? For example, so you've started the contract and you have this kind of idea which you are proposing to the client. How long does it take before it is implemented?
So I'd say we kind of come up with a plan. We work very much in agile Scrum methodology. So we would go into a spike sort of period where we would try to discover kind of how what we're actually solving, how we're solving it, writing scripts. But this is something that you would generally get done within 2 months. Really, that seems to be the kind of timeline that we've been working in. So we can work out the problem, we can come up with a solution, and we can start to deploy that all within 2 months.
But you still, despite it is edge and so easy and so forth, you sometimes need to negotiate with clients. So like all the time you need to the changes. So sometimes they make you wait really long before you can do something. Like with that added, how long does it take with the client?
I think it's
usually.
I know what you mean, because you're thinking more about, you kind of make these suggestions and the client's deciding whether or not you can do them. And I think it's slightly different on edge, because you kind of come in with those prerequisites in mind. So you're sort of coming in to say, we are going to do this on the CDN layer, and your prerequisites are all about access to that CDN layer. So you'll be negotiating with the front end team, with the edge ops team. They'll be checking your skills and your ability to be able to give you, because they're the gatekeepers to the CDN. They're not very willing to give most SEO teams access to that area. I mean, rightly so. It goes against everything that they work for. Their job is to keep the websites up and running 24/7, and the idea of letting in a team to release code on that CDN layer that could potentially bring down the site is something that would be quite scary to most front end or edge ops teams. So there's a lot of kind of prerequisite negotiation in terms of getting you access and being able to set up the testing areas, to be able to set up the staging that you'd want to do for these kind of changes. And then we would have to assure them with the sort of the proper amount of testing that we would do. So we show them what is our testing methodology, what are our unit tests, how are we rolling this out, what's our rollout plan. It's very, very structured. So most of the negotiation kind of happens before the clock starts, pretty much, and that would maybe take 1 or 2 months, and that's kind of part of the negotiation you're doing really to get the contract. So but if you have all of that done before you start the project, then you're pretty clear. I think one lesson that I've learned a long time ago in terms of delivering this kind of projects is get the prerequisites done before you sort of start the project. Otherwise, you're right, you don't want to be negotiating access to the CDN, 1 month into that kind of project. It would just be a disaster. So, you deal with this very much as a sort of enclosed development project, and get those prerequisites done as part of the contracting.
How do you reassure them? What do you use to make them convinced that this is required and you are talking something sensible and like that?
Yeah, it's previous experience, and again, this is why it's a difficult area to get into, because no Edge ops team is very willing to let a team come in and do this kind of work unless they can prove that they've already done this kind of work. So it's a self-fulfilling ability. So I was incredibly lucky working with the clients that I did originally, where I was doing this very much as a proof of concept pilot work. So I was allowed to kind of explore and learn in this area, and that was very unique. But generally, clients now would want to see exactly what you've done, what the results were from previous use cases, what they'd expect, they need the detail, and that requires that you've done this kind of work previously. But that's the only way really to get their assurance.
I see. What do you use to measure the results and show them? Maybe some tools, maybe something. So what's the environment of this testing, and how do you then report on this?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of performance improvements, I think we would see what the client had set up already. So we've worked in Rigor, we worked with SpeedCurve. You would use, obviously, Google Search Console as well for Core Web Vitals for those kind of results. In terms of SEO performance, again, we'd see what they had in place. Any of the SEO tools would help with visibility changes, which would be good. So. And then, yeah, I mean, you'd get into the analytics. So what have they got from Adobe Analytics to Google Analytics? What have they got set up? But yeah, we would use all of the analytics at our disposal really to prove the use cases. And I think you need to have a good understanding of analytics. So I've got several people in talks who are very good analysts, and we can use pretty much all of these platforms really to get the data that we need to prove the outcome of the work we're doing.
So, for example, you do something and you test something. How long does it take? How long do you measure it to make sure it's that result and that it was this influence that impacted it? So,
yeah,
how
I mean,
long does it test?
It's very, I mean, it'd be exactly what you're used to with SEO work. So performance improvements are brilliant because we love them as SEOs, because we do X, Y, Z, we have charts, and we can see very clearly this is when we released the Edge worker, or this is when we released the code, and this was the change. It's very immediate. Some things are trickier than that. I mean, if you're doing something that affects the crawling of a large website, you'll know this. It can take several months really for Google to relearn or adapt to that change. It's something that doesn't happen immediately. So some things do take considerably longer to get the evidence on. So it's SEO results are very rarely quick, in my opinion, especially on very large websites. So it is something where you have to kind of let the client know this is going to be something, this is what we'd expect, this is a hypothesis, and then we would work on the analytics to prove that out and prove, as you quite rightly say, was that due to this change, or was it due to other things that happened, or was it just one of the things that they needed to do to make everything better? This is a problem that all SEOs, I think, face, is how do we bring commercial value and proof to what we're doing. But the good thing about Edge is the speed at which you can make those changes. So you can do lots of very large changes very rapidly, and that does help considerably. Usually when you're just making these quite small tweaks on a website, on a large website, it's even harder, because unless you're doing changes that are quite very significant to the templates, it's very, very hard to see the differences.
And the changes which you want to do, how do you decide on them? So you just make an ordinary audit, or what? Or does the client have some problem and they refer to you, like are referred to you to solve it? So what's
A
how
bit of
do you
both.
do?
A bit of both. I mean, I certainly, in terms of performance problems, the client tends to come to us because they know that they're getting a very poor performance score, and they are trying to work out how to fix this. And it's performance is a very tricky area to really fix in, because you have to dedicate a lot of resource within the company to get it fixed, and you're never quite sure if that's going to pay off. And I think Google went very hard on performance improvements, and they linked those performance improvements very much with SEO improvements and with commercial gain. And I think they kind of had to walk that back a little bit over the last sort of year or so. I know I'll probably get into trouble with John Mueller for saying that, but they kind of had to walk that back a little bit, because there was a huge effort on performance, which is fantastic and it's great for clients, but it may not have delivered into the commercial success that some of the teams thought it would. So yeah, some of those things are a little bit trickier. But yeah, it's trying to find value though. It's, with SEO fixes generally, and I come to this from an SEO point of view, I know that there are things that we really want to fix. So we want to maybe fix things with the crawl, or we want to fix things with parameters, or we want to fix things with schema or deployment. This kind of, we know that they have an effect. We know from our own SEO experience, and we know from our own audits that these things have an effect. So those recommendations tend to come from the SEO side more than the client.
So you are building your own experiments, not based on your previous experience with other clients, but you have your own websites where you test things.
Yep, we have our own websites, and then you build up experience from doing these projects on clients. So a bit of both, really. So yeah, you very much have to test on your own websites as well, definitely. But you have and I'm very lucky with some of the enterprise clients that I've worked with, that they're very happy for that kind of test and learn scenario to go on. So, and if you take, in many respects, eBay is probably one of the most complicated websites for SEO that I've ever seen, and I can say that with my hand on my heart. And after 22 years, it is a very, very complicated website, and it's huge. And from an SEO point of view, it's a real challenge. And that's why I love eBay for that. And I know the SEOs that work on eBay love it for that. It's an intellectual challenge, because you're trying to steer something that's so large, and you're trying to steer it in the right direction all the time. And it's very it's made me feel a lot more sympathetic towards Google, because when you're working on a very large site, like Google is a very large site, you're steering a juggernaut, and you're trying to get it in the right way, and you're kind of nudging it back into line, back into direction. And someone comes along and points at a specific result in Google, and they say, "Oh, Google, why is this result wrong? This is terrible." And they expect Google engineers to jump on it and start fixing that result. And that's not how it works enterprise. You need to look at that problem, that issue, and then work out what's the solution that we can start to roll out that starts to fix it for the entire site. You can't fix individual small issues. If you start to fix those individual small issues, then you're going to have an increasing amount of tech debt that will catch up to you later on down the road. And that's what working on large sites is about. It's not about fixing the small individual issues, but using them as use cases to fix the overall direction of the site.
In terms of reward, except for that you're working with a very big and nice website and doing some impact to the industry, is it somehow also expressed in some maybe like real money terms? So do people in your Edge SEO and enterprise SEO get paid more than like other SEOs?
It depends what you mean by other SEOs. I know some affiliates who get exceptionally well paid. Payment in SEO is an interesting area. I think it's, and I know I've talked to you about this in the past, and between different countries, different markets, what do people get paid? I think the entry level really into SEO has kind of stayed the same, really, which is slightly depressing for me. That I think it's kind of stayed the same in the UK for the last 15 years, and people come into SEO, especially into agencies, and they're getting paid around 22,000. 24,000 UK as an entry level into UK. But it does move fairly quickly after that. So people move jobs, they jump jobs every year or so, and they manage to gain 2,000 or 4,000 increase each time they jump. So they can kind of increase that quite quickly. I'd say a head of SEO in the UK in an agency is usually getting around 70 or 80,000 a year. That's kind of normal. There are better jobs out there. I think it gets quite tricky at agency to get over 120. That's kind of quite rare. If you go into in-house, I would say that the entry level tends to be higher. So you tend to get paid more at the lower levels. And senior levels is kind of equivalent or slightly more than agency for in-house. Consultants get paid more though, and if you're coming into kind of what you get paid for Edge, I mean, it's like with everything in digital, if it's in demand and there aren't many people that do it and it's scarce, you're going to get paid more. So yes, you would expect you'd expect a much better salary for that.
So for those who are looking to go into Edge SEO, maybe make a competition for you or work with you, maybe, where do they better start, in agency or in-house or freelancers? What's the best way for them to make a quicker introduction into this whole business?
Yeah, I think either, but Edge SEO, as I say, it tends to attract people who are very technically curious because it's very new, and I think that's what attracted me to it. I got into SEO because I found it very interesting, and it was great doing really fun things that had big changes. And I think that's what I like about Edge SEO, is being able to make a change in Edge scripts across an entire website that makes a real material difference to that website. That's very exciting. But yeah, I don't think it really matters whether you start an agency or freelance or in-house, really, to get into this area. But you would have to be fairly happy to teach yourself, really, this. And I think that's that there is material out there, and you have to run your own tests. You'd have to understand how to run an Edge worker in Cloudflare. But you'd have to teach yourself quite a lot of this. I don't think it's going to be very easy at the moment to go into any environment where they're going to teach you this. So I think that's going to be the difficulty. If you want to get into it, I would absolutely recommend it, because I think it's going to be a fantastic growth area for those people, but it's going to be fairly self-taught. But if you self-taught to a degree and you come to someone like me, certainly I might be able to make good things happen for you.
Okay, so you found one of the contracts. What do you put into the contract as a deliverable? And do you guarantee anything? And how do you manage this in legal terms if it's not a secret? Not in big details, but how do you promise anything there, or do you at all?
Oh, I think you have to. You have to have deliverables, and you have to. But you know what you're delivering with an Edge project, because you define the activity very carefully. So are you delivering a solution to handle the redirects? Are you delivering a solution that allows you to add schema onto all the requests in this certain format? So the actual deliverables are very easy to define in an Edge project. So I think it's harder to promise the commercial outcome of it. And that's the same way it's always been in SEO. I don't think I'd ever want to be in a place where you can forecast what you think is going to happen, and from experience, where you've done this on other projects, what's likely to happen. But promising a client that this will absolutely happen is not a very sensible approach to do. So you need to kind of let the client know that this is kind of the outcome that we would expect. But yeah, that's kind of how you would propose it.
But each website is very unique, and sometimes the changes you need to make to this website or that website, you've never done them before. Like in my case, it's sometimes half of all the cases. So how do you tell them that it is really required, and it isn't? How do you forecast anything if you don't have any prior experience with that particular change?
Yeah, I mean, this is where. Well, exactly. I mean, this is where you would, and this is probably why we initially started doing Edge from an SEO perspective, because we know SEO. So you audit a site, and you know what a site has to do to improve their technical SEO, and you prioritized these issues because some will be more important than others. Some are affecting 10% of the site, some are affecting 90% of the site. So you have an idea of prioritization, and so as a technical SEO audit, you kind of want to execute that SEO audit. You want to do all of those fixes, and if you're simply doing those in Edge, then all you're doing is kind of saying that if you fix all of these things in your SEO audit, then your technical SEO will be improved, and we would expect to get a positive outcome from that. I think it's easier to do that with enterprise sites because they already have the link equity, they have the authority, and generally, if you improve the technical SEO on a large enterprise site, it's a very, always has a positive outcome. I've never yet worked on an enterprise site and fixed all the technical issues that I found and not had a positive outcome. But would I do that on a smaller site? And you never know. Is what they needed on that small site more authority? Did they need more content? Were there other bigger factors in play? And you can fix all of the technical issues on a small site, as you know, or even on a medium-sized site, and it doesn't have the dramatic effect that you would hope, because these other bits aren't present. They haven't got the right content, they haven't got the right authority, they haven't got the links even. So yeah, it's easier to predict this for an enterprise site, and I guess that's while it's difficult to get these contracts, the easy side of it is that I know fixing things on these websites always brings a positive effect. So that's the kind of benefit of working on these large enterprise websites, which maybe makes it easier. Maybe my life as an SEO is very much easier than other SEOs. I don't know. It swings and roundabouts, really.
It was my other question. So how do you cope with stress? Because when you're working with this very, very big website and you know how many people depend on it and on you, and if something breaks or works unexpected, so you are stressed most of the time. So how do you cope with that? And what do you do to keep yourself in good, sane mood, be able to love your life?
Well, yeah, it does get stressful because you have a lot of people involved, and you're right, the scale at which these websites operate is makes you very, very careful about the things that you're doing. And I think the way that you kind of offset that stress is you reduce risk mitigation, which is a really big thing of working in enterprise. So you work out, how can we do this thing with the least amount of risk? So if I'm going to test something on a large global website, I'm not going to do it on the US version, I'm not going to do it on the UK version. I'm going to pick a very, very small market and then test things on that scale, and then scale it up, roll it up as I prove that it's been successful. So you learn kind of risk mitigation techniques in terms of how you deploy these kind of these programs and these pilots, and that certainly helps. In terms of sort of my life, though, I think you have to be quite happy to work in a stressful environment, and I love my work, so I kind of don't mind that too much. But yeah, it's not always easy. But if you have good people around you, good teams, it works. So yeah, but I should probably take more time off, Alessia. You're probably right.
Can you tell what's the future of Edge? Where is it all going? What the trend is, and what can we expect in the near future and in the distant future?
Yeah, absolutely, Alessia. Yeah, I think I've had some people who kind of talked to me about Edge, and they've said, is this is this a new trend? Is it something that's going to last for a year or a couple of years? Is it like, VR? Is it like voice search? We're not mentioning voice search anymore, but is it something like this that's sort of happening and it's going to go away again? And I really don't think it will. And the reasons I don't think it will is because this is fundamental architecture for the web. We're able to now do computation on our origin server, but we're able to create lightweight web services now through the edge that are doing different parts of that computation. We're able to kind of develop in layers, and I think that's hugely powerful, because we're going to do all these various bits of logic that we can now stick on the edge that would have been very hard to incorporate into our sort of main into our origin server, into our sort of main application. We can say, we can have a separate web service that maybe kind of helps deliver different site maps for different parts of the site without having to develop anything on the origin server at all. So we can do very quick, very agile kind of development using this environment, and I think that's hugely powerful. And you can see the way that the CDNs are developing this, they are increasing, kind of like Moore's law. We're kind of increasing the capacity and the ability to do this work, this logic on the edge. It's increasing, every year. And when I first started this, we were able to do simple policies for redirects in Akamai, sort of 5,000 one-to-one redirects, and then 10,000 one-to-one redirects. And now I can do, 1 million or 2 million one-to-one redirects. So it's increasing very, very fast. And the database storage in terms of KV store is increasing dramatically, and the ability for us to take data and attach it to the edge as well. So we can attach our databases on the origin, and we can basically pull data from them into the edge. So this isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon. It's going to be a major part of internet development. So yeah, I really think it's the future.
Usually they don't, but if someone has any questions, can they ask to you where they can find you? Do you like to be contacted or anything like that?
Yeah, feel free.
So
contact me through Twitter's usually the best place, to be honest. Yeah, to your point, when you're kind of relaxing, I go and jump into SEO Twitter for a little while and see what everyone's complaining about. So you can find me on Twitter at Nick Wilsdon is my username on Twitter. So feel free to send me a message there.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.